How do you defend yourself when crucial evidence ages 3 decades overnight while you're being prosecuted, making you appear guilty of crimes you didn't commit? After studying the aging evidence mystery, I've identified defense strategies that could save innocent people from conviction when physical evidence becomes unreliable through impossible aging. What I'm about to share could be the difference between conviction and exoneration if you're ever faced with evidence that has mysteriously aged beyond its actual timeline. Because courts are still learning how to handle evidence that violates natural aging processes. I'm Daniel Mackenzie, and the aging evidence cases taught me that sometimes the best defense against impossible evidence is proving that the impossible actually happened. The fundamental challenge with aged evidence is that it appears to support timelines that make defendants look guilty of long-term planning or premeditation when the evidence aging occurred after the crime, not before it. Here's the defense strategy that works when evidence ages impossibly. Document everything, trust nothing, and prove that evidence instability makes forensic conclusions unreliable. By the way, everything I'm sharing comes from successful defense strategies and expert testimony included in my book, The Impossible Files. These techniques have been tested in actual courtrooms where aged evidence threatened to convict innocent defendants. Defense strategy number 1. Establish baseline evidence documentation. The moment you discover evidence has aged unexpectedly, demand comprehensive documentation of its current state and comparison with its original documentation. Aged evidence often reveals itself through inconsistencies between initial and current forensic analysis. In the Detective Santos case, the defense team requested carbon dating, material analysis, and forensic examination of all evidence to establish that aging had occurred after the evidence was collected, not before the crime. The key insight was proving that evidence had experienced accelerated aging while in police custody, rather than accepting prosecution claims that the aging indicated pre-crime planning or different evidence. Defense strategy number 2. Challenge evidence chain of custody. When evidence ages impossibly, the chain of custody becomes your strongest defense tool. Aged evidence suggests either tampering that needs explanation or physical phenomena that make the evidence unreliable for determining guilt. Document every person who had access to the evidence, every storage condition that might affect aging, and every environmental factor that could contribute to accelerated deterioration. The goal is proving that evidence aging occurred under conditions that shouldn't cause aging. This creates reasonable doubt about evidence reliability without requiring you to explain the impossible aging phenomenon. You just need to prove the aging happened under circumstances that make forensic conclusions unreliable. Defense strategy number 3. Expert testimony about evidence instability. Bring in forensic experts who can testify that evidence showing impossible aging patterns cannot be relied upon for determining criminal timelines or connecting defendants to crimes. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's testimony in the aged evidence case was crucial. Evidence that ages 30 years overnight cannot be trusted for forensic analysis because we don't understand the mechanisms causing the aging or what other changes might have occurred. The expert testimony doesn't need to explain why the aging occurred. It just needs to establish that evidence showing impossible aging patterns is scientifically unreliable for determining guilt or innocence. Defense strategy number 4. Alternative evidence theories. Present alternative explanations for what the aged evidence might represent, focusing on reasonable doubt rather than definitive alternative theories. Aged evidence might indicate evidence tampering, laboratory contamination, or unknown preservation failures. The defense doesn't need to prove what caused the aging. You just need to prove that aged evidence creates enough reasonable doubt about timeline accuracy that conviction based on that evidence would be unreliable. Focus on questions rather than answers. If evidence can age 30 years overnight, what else about this evidence might be unreliable? If we don't understand why this aging occurred, how can we trust forensic conclusions based on aged materials? Defense strategy number 5. Precedent research and case law. Research other cases involving impossibly aged evidence to establish legal precedents for excluding or questioning evidence that shows unexplained aging patterns. Courts are beginning to recognize that evidence showing impossible aging creates reliability issues that affect admissibility and weight of evidence in criminal trials. Right now, you can learn all the defense strategies for handling impossibly aged evidence and 15 other types of impossible evidence for just $2.99. I'm including actual court transcripts, expert testimonies, and successful defense techniques for evidence that challenges natural laws. But I'm raising the price to $9.99 next week because law schools are requesting this content for their courses on defending against unusual evidence. Get it now while it's affordable. The key insight for defending against aged evidence is that you don't need to explain why evidence aged impossibly. You just need to prove that impossibly aged evidence cannot be trusted for determining criminal liability. Courts are increasingly willing to exclude or give reduced weight to evidence that shows characteristics that violate known scientific principles because such evidence creates more questions than answers about what actually occurred. Defense attorneys are beginning to routinely request evidence aging analysis in cases involving physical evidence because aged evidence has become recognized as a reliability indicator that affects case outcomes. Get the impossible files now for $2.99. Link in description. Because knowing how to defend against impossibly aged evidence isn't just legal strategy. It could be your protection against wrongful conviction when physical evidence becomes misleading through unexplained changes. The most important principle is that evidence which violates natural aging processes creates reasonable doubt about everything else related to that evidence, and reasonable doubt is all you need to avoid wrongful conviction.